Thank you. You know, we get our stories, all of us, from different places. And this one from NPR. It was in an airplane, and there was a little girl, about 5 years old, sitting right next to the window. Her mother was sitting next to her. And you could tell the little girl was so excited. It was her first plane ride. If she hadn't had that seatbelt on, she'd be hanging from the ceiling. That plane started down, that moment of liftoff, circling around. Everything was quiet on the plane. And then all of a sudden, that little girl turned to her mama. When do we start getting smaller? Now, none of us really know what actually happens. It's magic, though. And it's all about perspective. And I feel that our stories are all about perspective. It's perfect that we're gathered here. You know, humans have always told and listened to stories. I feel like it's in our DNA. Right at this moment, we're in this lineage that goes back thousands of years. But this morning's session, we're going to focus in on 40 to 50 years of this storytelling. You'll be getting different perspectives from the people up here. And as I've thought and imaged this, I keep thinking of other things that maybe won't be mentioned, the Moth and StoryCorps and international storytelling and lots of things that won't be. There's a timeline back there, and that's a place for any of you to put anything up there. Lots of little triangle-ish shapes, lavender paper. Put up any of the events that you know about, that you know when they started. Put the name of any of your, what I think of as firekeepers. But this is going to be a look at this storytelling revival. It's a story that has brilliant, transformative moments, as well as messy soap opera dramas. And we're going to touch on some of all of that. Some of you are brand new to storytelling, and you don't know these triumphs and pitfalls, maybe, of the last half century. Others are maybe in a place of great anger, sadness, hurt with some of the things that have been going on and unfolding. Others just want to forget about it, and others want to create a new story. I think it doesn't matter where you are on that spectrum, and lots of places that I didn't mention. But I'm hoping that you'll have an open heart for what we have to say today. A lot of you have lived this experience yourself, like in Lynn's story last night. You've lived the story. So you'll have your versions, and we're hoping that this will be a spark for this weekend and for when you go back home to keep telling the story. It's always seemed strange to me that an organization devoted to storytelling really hasn't ever spoken their own story. Joseph Sobol wrote an amazing book that can be a great resource if you want to go deeper, the storyteller's journey. But this story has not been spoken as a community. And that's one of the reasons that Willy had this idea to do something like this morning. We're going to be honoring our fire keepers too. Those people that shine a light on the path for us. Maybe family, maybe other storytellers, maybe living, maybe already passed away. But you'll be hearing each of us naming some of those people, and you can be thinking about your own. You know, Leonardo da Vinci said that when you put your hand down into a stream of flowing water, you're touching just the last of what's going on and just the first of what's coming. I think it is that way with story as well. So, now, to my story. I was hired as a storyteller back in 1971, 40 years ago, by a public library. I'd graduated from college with a degree in political science, which some people say is a good background for storytelling. But I had never done anything like that. My cousin Barbara Freeman brought me into it. 2 years later, in 1973, I heard about this storytelling gathering. It's going to happen in a little town in East Tennessee, Jonesboro. Well, I pulled into the parking lot on a Saturday night, and the parking lot was jammed with people at the Daniel Boone High School. And Jerry Clower, a comedian, storyteller, he was a Grand Ole Opry star, had come to entertain this huge, overflowing crowd. Well, the next afternoon, on Sunday, it was very different. The town had set up 60 chairs facing a flatbed truck. There were politicians and bluegrass musicians. And then Ray Hicks took the stage. 6 feet, 7 inches tall. He looked like he had just walked out of the 18th century. He had a bib overalls extra long, a harmonica sticking out of one of the pockets. He spoke with an archaic voice. And he transformed everyone of us sitting on those folding chairs. The air in Jonesboro changed. Now, I know that there are many strong opinions about Jimmy Neal Smith. He's the founder of the National Storytelling Festival. But he's like a brother to me, and like any family, we have strong disagreements on a lot of stuff, but I still love him. And I want this morning to start off with, I'm going to get to some other things, but I'm going to start off honoring him and giving him thanks. He was the one that had a vision and a desire, that original idea 40 years ago in 1973, to have a storytelling event. And he boldly called it the first National Storytelling Festival. His real focus, I believe, was really, and I think he would say this, was really trying to bring new life to his beloved town of Jonesboro. And he's maintained that all the way through these 40 years. And to me, given that that Saturday night event with Jerry Clower was such a huge financial success, a success in lots of different ways that were measured at that time, I applaud him for having the, in my view, wisdom and foresight to decide and know that the real magic happened when Ray Hicks took the stage. So the next year, instead of a big-time star selling lots of tickets, he had Catherine Wyndham, Marshall Ward from up in the mountains. I was there telling as a children's storyteller, and Doc McConnell emceed us. Now, early on, Jimmy Neal also realized that we needed an organization, a nonprofit, to promote storytelling. In 1974, the very next year, we formed a board of directors, and voila, NAPS, N-A-P-P-S, the National Association for the Preservation and Perpetuation of Storytelling. And if you can say it, pay $5, you too can be a member. Now, NAPS was the mother organization of what was to become this, the National Storytelling Network, and the International Storytelling Center. It gets confusing, at least to me, with all these names and acronyms. And so today, I'm going to call all of them NAPS until we get to a certain different point. And to me, the lineage of this organization is NAPS. It goes right back to 1974. That's our history as we're telling our story. A lot happened in those first 10 years. Some people think it was all about the festival, but it wasn't. That board was formed. Jimmy Neal started putting out the Yarn Spinner, a newsletter that was to become eventually the National Storytelling Magazine. We held our first conference, 1978. Diane Wolkstein had that vision. People came from all over the United States, some around the world, came to listen and learn about stories, to connect with each other, ask each other questions. What is this storytelling? We had NAPS-sponsored guilds, storytelling circles in different communities. We had a month-long institute, weekend workshops where people traveled. So a lot was going on in those first 10 or 15 years. And all of us were volunteers, including Jimmy Neal. He was basically running everything there in Jonesboro. I was on the board for 10 years. I have the distinction of being the person that served, the only person that served 10 years. After that, there were term limits. So, and I'm very glad for all those that followed me that you never had to serve 10 years. It was like a second job for me with no pay. And I was passionate about storytelling. I still am. But I was spreading the word like an evangelical preacher. By the mid-70s, my cousin, Barbara Freeman, she and I had quit our library job, formed the Folk Tellers, got a pickup truck with a camper in the back, and we thank you. And we started traveling, having no idea we could make a living. Who would have thought you could make a living telling stories? But we knew we wanted to live as storytellers. And every stage I was on, whether it was a grade school cafeteria, the Vancouver Folk Festival with a sea of people out in the audience, a New Age magazine interview, a library convention, I was always saying, come to Jonesboro. It's in October, beautiful time of the year. Come to the mountains and hear stories. Now, Jimmy Neal was handling the home front, all the details, logistics of putting on a festival, and handling NAPS. He was the one with that file drawer that kind of held everything. He was keeping people informed about what was going on. And then there was this small cadre of us out in the field, telling people to come, telling people about storytelling, telling people to join NAPS. $5 it was. And so the numbers at the festival began growing. From 60 that first Sunday afternoon, actually that's a place Jimmy Neal and I differ. I remember about 35 or 40. I think he's saying 60. But it started to grow, 100. 500, that was a red letter year, all the way up over these years to close or over 10,000 people that gather in that little town. And from the very beginning, it was a model for other festivals all around the United States and around the world. Now, early on, Ray Hicks, for you folks that are new, that's that mountain man I mentioned, 6 feet 7 inches tall, filled with him. passed away in 2003, but heavily influenced the storytelling. He became the face of the storytelling revival that was coming out of Jonesboro. His presence gave the festival deep traditional roots. And his way of telling that down-home uniqueness, his enormous, generous heart, he attracted the national press. The LA Times came. The New York Times came. Smithsonian Magazine. Walter Cronkite even sent a news crew to the ghost storytelling in Jonesboro. Later, CNN, all kinds of people that wanted in on this. Now, at one point, late-night host Johnny Carson wanted Ray Hicks on his show. Now, the Hicks did not have a telephone, so they had to send an emissary to Beach Mountain. Ray told him, well, if Johnny wants to come here to this country, I'll tell him about Jack. Well, word of the festival was spreading through the media. Folk music festivals had kind of grasped a hold of it, and through friends to friends, through storytellers. I remember a woman from Canada that came, and you know, the festival itself was so welcoming, and I feel it still is. You know, there's something bizarre about that when there can be anger about something and feeling like it's, you know, not the way it should be, and yet we hear these amazing stories, and for many of us, our hearts are right there, and we continue going back to that family reunion. But I remember getting a letter from someone. She had come down from Canada, did not know a soul, had never been in the South, and she said as she walked down the streets, she felt like she was returning to a family reunion. People who were already telling in their own communities were connecting with each other and with Naps, J. O'Callahan, Laura Sims, Brother Blue, Doug Elliott. People attending the festival went back home and started their festivals. Alabama, Texas, San Francisco, Chicago, Kentucky. And storytellers came, went back home, quit their jobs. Elizabeth Ellis, Jim May, Ed Stivender, Nancy Schimmel. As I traveled around performing in the U.S., I was always on the lookout for storytellers. Now today that might just seem almost unheard of, that we had to beat the bushes to find storytellers. I remember meeting Jackie Torrance. I heard her at a library convention over in Winston-Salem. It was in the spring of the year. I said, come to Jonesboro in October, and she did. I heard Donald Davis in a living room down in Brasstown at John C. Campbell Folk School. He was telling Jack tales. I said, come to Jonesboro next October, and he did. Gamble Rogers, Utah Phillips, David Holt, Ron Evans. Everywhere I traveled, meeting and hearing storytellers and saying, come. I was the artistic director for a lot of those years in the beginning when I was on the board of directors. And unfortunately, a lot of people felt left out. Why wasn't I invited to the festival? How come there's nobody from my region that's up there performing? And I really have to take responsibility for that. I had this hard, fast rule that I wanted to have been at a performance and seen and heard and experienced the tellers before they were on stage in Jonesboro. And I think that my fear was, and I think it came from fear, I think my fear was, you know, if you go to if you're a classical music buff and you go to a performance and the pianist isn't that good, it's like, you'll go the next week or the next month. I was afraid people wouldn't do that with storytelling. And so it turned out to be very limiting for a lot of people. But still, the festival kept growing. And as the years passed, there were real rumblings that NAPS was too centered in the South. Now, some of the tellers were starting to come from other places. The board members were representing different geological regions, but the primary heart of NAPS was right there in Jonesboro. That was where everything was kind of going out. Even though there was lots happening in other places, there was this sense, that's the heartbeat. As I look back on it, I think Jimmy Neal was really clear from the beginning that he wanted to revitalize Jonesboro and that storytelling was going to be a vehicle, a saving grace. He wanted Jonesboro to be the capital of the storytelling world. But there was also this bubbling up and recognition that this movement was much bigger than Jonesboro, different visions, and that foreshadowed the conflict that was to come. In the late 80s, NAPS had its first full-time staff. I don't know the year. Jimmy Neal was the director. Actually, Jimmy Neal became the director in 1984. And it was at my wedding that he announced to me he was now director instead of on the board. And that's a little known fact that I guess now is known, Jimmy Neal. I'm sending Jimmy Neal a copy of the DVD too, so I've been talking to him all about this. Not all about it, but some of it. Well, I think that full-time staff, that first full-time staff, it meant that what happened on that weekend in October had to generate enough income to sustain the whole year. And I think that's when some decisions started being made from a financial viewpoint. And another major shift was happening then. In 1987, the very first NAPS-sponsored event happened outside of East Tennessee. It was the first National Storytelling Congress in St. Louis, Missouri. And that was the lineage as well for here. And at that conference, there was a lot of things discussed, but one of the big things was traditional stories. Who owns them? Who can tell them? Can you tell outside your own tradition? Can I learn one from somebody else word for word, or can I get it out of a book? And now, it used to be another amazing thing for a lot of people. It used to be that almost everyone told traditional stories. You never heard a personal story on stage the first 15 years of this festival, of that festival. But I think this concern about traditional stories had people going, well, I don't know who I am exactly and which stories I'm allowed to tell. Let me. And the folklorists were kind of saying some of that too, you know, who's traditional and who can tell the stories. So I think people started turning towards their own personal stories, following Donald Davis and his brilliance on stage with that format. And as Jimmy Neal has always been a big dreamer. And in the 1990s, part of his vision was a building, a monument to storytelling. He wanted a museum, a gift shop. He wanted people to have a different reason to come to Jonesboro all year long and not just in October. Most people on the NAPS board at that time had a different vision. They supported the festival wholeheartedly, but they were ready for this organization to be true to its name, national. Storytelling producers and organizers, probably a lot of you that are here right now, you and us, all of us, we were creating storytelling events all over the country. And the NAPS board was not interested in putting money, time, and energy into a building in Jonesboro. A division formed, boiled to a head, and in 1998, there was a split. Out of this disagreement, two separate organizations formed. ISC, the International Storytelling Center, which still produces the festival and teller in residence, and Jimmy Neal has been director up for a long time. I'm not exactly sure what his title is right now, but Emeritus. And NSN, NAPS, that was the other organization, our member organization. This was a very difficult time. There were formal legal negotiations. NSN/NAPS was part owner of the festival and was given a percent of the festival profits. There were misunderstandings in the broader community. Many never knew what happened. Again, we weren't telling our story, or it wasn't getting to people. People who had attended the festival and supported storytelling for decades weren't in on the details and didn't understand, well, why should NSN/NAPS get some money from this? They're not running it. But here is what got lost in the shuffle. NAPS and its members had been the MCs, volunteers, ambassadors of storytelling, not to mention all of the members who were storytellers, who had been featured at the festival for reduced fees, all that volunteer work, checking tickets, running out to the airport to pick up people, making sure a new person felt welcomed. They'd been integral, then going back home, telling everyone to come to Jonesboro. We all did this. We were integral to that festival. That's why we got a percentage, and instead of 50-50, since it just seemed to people that were hired at the time with ISC, it would be too difficult. And I can understand some of this. It would be too difficult to run the festival with input coming all over. So the running of it, the producing of it, was handed to ISC. But that was a missed opportunity too. It meant there was no storytellers giving direct input to the artistic vision of that festival. But that's what happened in 1998. A lot of other things happened as well. And the festival continued growing. NAPS was relegated to the sidelines, and there were resentments on both sides. That continued through this last decade. NAPS continued receiving that percentage, but had no input. And as many of you know, the building proved to be a financial drain. There was an economic downturn. And at the end of 2010, ISC declared bankruptcy. More hard feelings, resentments, distrust, anger at the court documents, anger at the newspaper articles, anger at the percentage being legally taken away, anger. And just this last week, almost coinciding with this conference, ISC is out of Chapter 11. Which I am glad for, because I want to see that festival and the teller in residence continue, hopefully with some different vision, a broader vision, hopefully more inclusive, like Gay was talking about. Now, I will say that Mary Gay and I have very different views. I don't think of us as motherless and fatherless, but rather as elders, co-equals in that family, where one of the siblings had not been a good steward of the finances. But no doubt, this is a huge turning point. Johnny Moses, many of y'all know him, storyteller who is First Nation from Canada, raised in a very rural area on the west coast of Vancouver Island. He said that in his tribe, mistakes are seen as a window that the soul can climb out of so that it can get bigger. I think all of us have made mistakes. And I'm sure our elders, our firekeepers, are watching us climb out of that window. And my hope is that somehow there can be forgiveness. When that anger is there, only anger, it gets fed and more, and it doesn't really hurt anyone else. I know you've all heard that. That's the Oprah moment for this talk. But I really believe it, so I'm hoping there can be forgiveness, not necessarily, everything's okay, but forgiveness of some kind, and that we really can move on but remember our lineage. Now, first up after me is going to be Laura Sims, a brilliant storyteller, story collector, a compassionate heart of this storytelling world. She's traveled to Romania, all over Africa, more recently made numerous trips to Haiti, going where she needs to be, going where she's called to be, to bring story.